The Tribunal's verdict. The Grand Hall of the Galactic Tribunal was a marvel of architecture, vast and majestic, filled with the murmurs of countless alien species. Beings of various shapes, sizes, and colors filled the seats, their attention fixed on the central dais, where the Tribunal's 7 members sat in judgment. The accused stood in the center of the room, bathed in an unforgiving spotlight. His name was Captain Ethan Walker, a human from Earth. A Deathworlder, as the galactic community called him. One born on a planet notorious for its harsh environments, hostile wildlife, and relentless natural disasters. Yet, here he stood, defiantly calm in the face of what was almost certainly a death sentence. The charge: the unauthorized and catastrophic intervention in the affairs of the peaceful colony of Meridia V. The evidence was irrefutable. The charred remains of once thriving cities, millions of lives lost, and a destabilized planetary ecosystem. Ethan had led a daring rescue mission to save the colony from an invading force, but his methods had left the world in ruins. The Tribunal, cold and calculating, had little sympathy for the humans' rationale. Captain Walker, the voice of the Chief Justice, a towering Siluran with a crystalline body that shimmered in the light, echoed through the chamber. You have been found guilty of violating the Galactic Non-Intervention Accord. Your reckless actions have resulted in the loss of countless lives. The Tribunal sentences you to exile on Cairn IV. A hushed gasp spread through the audience. Cairn IV was known across the galaxy as the deadliest planet ever discovered. A death world where even the atmosphere was toxic, the wildlife was vicious, and the very land itself seemed to thirst for blood. It was a sentence of slow, inevitable death. Ethan met the Chief Justice's gaze without flinching. "If I may speak, Your Honors." The Tribunal members exchanged glances. Then the Chief Justice nodded. "You may." Ethan's voice, steady and resonant, cut through the tension. "I don't deny the devastation on Meridia V, but what you fail to understand is that I did what was necessary to save those people from a fate worse than death. The enemy we faced was not just another invader. It was a force that would have consumed the entire galaxy if left unchecked." A murmur of disbelief rippled through the assembly. But Ethan continued, his words imbued with an urgency that demanded attention. "I had a choice: stand by and watch as billions more died, or act, knowing the risks. I chose to act. And yes, I made mistakes. But Meridia V's destruction was not in vain. It bought us time to prepare, time to unite. What I did was not out of arrogance or thirst for power. It was out of a desperate need to protect all sentient life in this galaxy." The Chief Justice's crystalline form flickered, reflecting the tension in the room. "You expect us to believe that your actions were a form of protection, that the deaths of millions were justified." "I expect you to believe in the truth," Ethan replied, his voice unwavering. "And the truth is, the enemy I fought is still out there. They are coming, and if we don't stand together, none of us will survive." The room fell into an uneasy silence. The Tribunal members whispered among themselves, their expressions unreadable. After a moment, the Chief Justice spoke again. "Captain Walker, your claims are bold, but they do not absolve you of your crimes. The sentence stands: you will be exiled to Cairn IV. However," the Chief Justice hesitated, "should your warnings prove true, should this enemy indeed threaten the galaxy as you say, the Tribunal will reconsider your case." Ethan nodded, knowing that it was the best outcome he could hope for. "I understand. But remember this: when the time comes, and it will, do not delay in sending aid. For when they arrive, there will be no second chances." As he was escorted out of the chamber, the reality of his fate began to sink in. Cairn IV was a death sentence, but it was also a challenge, one that Ethan Walker was determined to survive. And if he did, he would return, not just to clear his name, but to unite the galaxy against the impending darkness. As the doors closed behind him, sealing his fate, Ethan allowed himself a grim smile. The tribunal might have sentenced him to death, but they had also given him a chance to prove that humanity was not to be underestimated, and he would seize that chance with everything he had. The galaxy was about to learn that a Deathworlder was not so easily defeated. The Deathworld's challenge. The descent onto Xan IV was as treacherous as Ethan had expected. His pod, barely functional after passing through the planet's violent atmosphere, crashed onto the surface with a bone-rattling impact. The thick, acidic fog that permeated the air hissed against the hull, as if the very planet was eager to consume the intruder. Ethan unbuckled himself and grabbed his survival pack, double-checking its contents. The Tribunal had been generous enough to provide him with minimal supplies: a respirator, a few days' worth of rations, a multi-tool, and a plasma pistol with limited charges. They expected him to die quickly, but he had other plans. As the hatch opened, the planet's stench hit him, sulfuric, acrid, and oppressive. The landscape before him was a nightmare come to life. Jagged rocks, bubbling pools of noxious liquids, and twisted vegetation that seemed more intent on killing than growing. The sky was a perpetual twilight, with swirling clouds that crackled with green lightning. Ethan activated his respirator and stepped out onto the barren ground. His boots sank slightly into the soft, spongy surface, which oozed a dark liquid with each step. He knew he had to keep moving. The longer he stayed in one place, the more likely the planet would find a way to kill him. He quickly established a perimeter, using the multi-tool to set up a few rudimentary defenses around the crash site. Then he started scanning the area, trying to gather as much information as possible. The flora and fauna, what little there was, seemed to be in a constant state of warfare. Each species adapted to kill or be killed. Ethan had to be smarter, faster, and more resourceful if he wanted to survive. Hours passed as he scouted the area, avoiding the most dangerous-looking creatures and setting traps for smaller ones. His primary goal was to find water, clean, drinkable water, and a place to establish a more permanent camp. As night fell, the temperature plummeted, and the air grew thick with predatory sounds. It wasn't long before he encountered his first real threat. A creature, large and insectoid, with razor-sharp mandibles and a thick, armored hide, emerged from the shadows. It moved with a terrifying speed, clearly intent on making Ethan its next meal. He fired his plasma pistol, the shots barely making a dent in the creature's armor. It lunged at him, and he barely dodged in time, rolling to the side and scrambling to his feet. His mind raced as he tried to figure out a way to take it down. The creature was relentless, its mandibles snapping dangerously close to his face. Ethan led it into one of his traps, a pit covered with thin branches and leaves. The creature fell in, but not before its mandibles grazed his leg, tearing through his suit and into his flesh. He gritted his teeth against the pain, knowing that the injury could prove fatal if not treated quickly. With the creature temporarily trapped, Ethan wasted no time. He pulled out his multi-tool and ignited a makeshift flare, tossing it into the pit. The creature screeched as the flames engulfed it, the fire finally penetrating its armored hide. Ethan watched, breathing heavily, as the creature's screams faded, and it succumbed to the flames. He quickly patched up his leg, using what little medical supplies he had. The wound was deep, and the risk of infection on a planet like Xan IV was high. But he couldn't afford to slow down. If he stayed in one place for too long, the planet would throw something else at him, something he might not survive. As the night wore on, Ethan found a small cave that provided some shelter from the elements. It wasn't much, but it was defensible, and he could see the entrance from where he sat, his back against the wall. He set up a few more traps and settled in, knowing that sleep would be a luxury he couldn't afford just yet. He spent the next few days in a brutal cycle of survival, scavenging for food, searching for water, and fending off increasingly dangerous creatures. Each day was a battle, each night a test of his endurance. But Ethan was determined to survive, to outlast the planet's attempts to kill him. He had to, because he knew that if he could survive here, he could survive anywhere. On the fourth day, he found what he was looking for, a freshwater spring hidden deep within a ravine. It was a small victory, but a crucial one. He filled his canteen and drank deeply, the cool water reviving his flagging spirits. He set up a more permanent camp near the spring, knowing that it would give him the best chance of surviving long-term. But as he sat by the water, tending to his wounds and planning his next move, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up, and he reached for his pistol, scanning the area with narrowed eyes. He saw nothing, but the feeling persisted. He knew better than to ignore his instincts. HFY was a Deathworld, and it had already shown him that it would stop at nothing to kill him. But if he was being hunted, he would make sure he wasn't an easy target. Ethan stood, gripping his pistol tightly, ready for whatever came next. He had survived this long, but the true test was yet to come. And whatever it was that hunted him, it was about to learn that humans, especially those from a Deathworld, were not so easily defeated. The Alliance of Survivors. The days on HFY bled into weeks, and Ethan Walker became something more than human. The planet's harsh conditions, its ceaseless attempts to kill him, had forced him to adapt, to evolve. His senses sharpened, his reflexes quickened, and his understanding of the Deathworld deepened. He was no longer just surviving, he was thriving, outmaneuvering the planet at every turn. But the sense of being watched never left him. It gnawed at his mind, keeping him on edge even during moments of relative peace. The attacks from the planet's wildlife had become more coordinated, as if something or someone was guiding them. Then, one night, they revealed themselves. Ethan had just finished reinforcing his camp, using the bones of a large creature he had slain earlier that day. He was sitting by a small fire, the warmth a welcome comfort in the planet's chill, when he heard the faintest rustle behind him. He spun around, pistol drawn, only to find himself face to face with a figure shrouded in a cloak made of leaves and bark. For a moment, they simply stared at each other. Then slowly the figure lowered its hood, revealing a face that was both familiar and alien. It was a woman, her features sharp and angular, with eyes that glowed faintly in the dark. She was humanoid, but clearly not human. "You're not alone here," she said, her voice soft but firm. "We've been watching you." Ethan lowered his pistol but didn't let go of it. "Who are you?" The woman stepped closer, revealing more of herself. She was tall, with a lithe, muscular build, and her movements were as fluid as water. "My name is Liara. I'm the leader of a small group of survivors. We, too, were sentenced to this Deathworld by the Tribunal." Ethan's mind raced. He had suspected he wasn't the only one to be sent here, but to meet others, other beings who had managed to survive, was a surprise. "How many of you are there?" "6, Laura replied. "We've been on HFY for years, adapting, learning how to survive. We've been watching you since you arrived. You're different from the others." "Others?" Ethan asked, his curiosity piqued. "Many have been sent here," Laura said, a hint of sadness in her voice. "But none lasted as long as you. Most died within days, some within hours. But you've managed to thrive." Ethan looked at her, trying to gauge her intentions. "Why approach me now?" "Because we need your help," Laura said bluntly. HFY is not just a Deathworld. It's alive. It's sentient. It's been testing us, pushing us to our limits. But recently, something has changed. The planet's attacks have become more aggressive, more focused. We believe it's preparing for something catastrophic. Ethan's eyes narrowed. "You think it's preparing for the enemy I warned the Tribunal about?" Liara nodded. "Yes. We've been picking up strange signals, echoes of something massive moving through space. Whatever it is, it's heading this way. And if it reaches HFY, it won't stop here," Ethan finished. understanding the gravity of the situation. It will continue consuming everything in its path. Exactly, Liara said. We need to find a way off this planet. We need to warn the galaxy. Ethan considered her words carefully. He had been preparing for something like this, though he hadn't expected it to come so soon. If what Liara said was true, then his time on Sci-Fi had been a prelude to a much larger battle. What's your plan? He asked, finally lowering his weapon. Liara smiled, a hint of relief in her eyes. There's an old shipwreck not far from here. We've been scavenging parts, trying to make it functional again. But it's a massive task, and we're running out of time. With your help, we might just be able to get it airborne. Ethan nodded. Lead the way. Over the next few days, Ethan was introduced to the rest of the survivors. A diverse group of beings from various species, each with their own unique skills and experiences. There was Kor, a hulking reptilian engineer who had been working tirelessly on the ship. Vela, a diminutive but fierce insectoid medic. Rin, a stealthy avian scout. And the twins, Zara and Zin, who specialized in combat and tactics. Together, they formed an unlikely but formidable team. Under Ethan's leadership, they worked around the clock, repairing the ship and preparing for the imminent arrival of the unknown enemy. The work was grueling, but there was a sense of camaraderie among them, a bond forged by their shared struggle for survival. As the ship slowly took shape, the survivors began to hope. But the planet was relentless. Each day brought new challenges, new dangers, as Sci-Fi seemed determined to prevent their escape. The attacks from the wildlife became more frequent, more coordinated, as if the planet itself was aware of their efforts. But Ethan and his team pressed on, driven by the knowledge that failure was not an option. They knew that if they didn't escape, if they didn't warn the galaxy, countless lives would be lost. And so they fought, not just for themselves, but for the survival of all sentient life. Finally, after weeks of back-breaking labor, the ship was ready. It was a patchwork of different technologies, barely held together by ingenuity and sheer willpower. But it would fly. At least, they hoped it would. As they prepared for takeoff, the ground began to tremble, and the sky darkened with ominous clouds. The planet itself seemed to be raging against them, its fury unleashed in a final, desperate attempt to keep them grounded. But Ethan Walker had faced death before, and he was not about to let the planet, no matter how deadly, stand in his way. All systems go, Cole rumbled from the cockpit, ready for launch. Ethan took one last look at the landscape, the twisted, hostile world that had tried so hard to kill him. Then he climbed aboard the ship, sealing the hatch behind him. "Let's get off this rock," he said, strapping himself in. The engines rode to life, and the ship lifted off, shaking violently as it fought against the planet's gravitational pull. The ground below cracked and heaved, and the sky erupted in green lightning, but the ship held steady, powered by the determination of its crew. As they broke through the atmosphere, leaving Sci-Fi behind, Ethan allowed himself a brief moment of triumph. They had done it. They had survived the Deathworld, and now they were free. But the true battle was yet to come. The final stand. The galaxy beyond Sci-Fi was vast and indifferent, but as the survivors flew through space, they could feel the weight of what lay ahead. The signals Liara had detected grew stronger, more distinct, and with them came a sense of urgency. Whatever was coming was close, closer than any of them had anticipated. Ethan and his crew had little time to rest. As they traveled, they received fragmented transmissions from distant worlds, reports of strange sightings, and massive fleets moving through uncharted space. It was clear that the enemy Ethan had warned about was no longer a distant threat. It was here, and it was moving with terrifying speed. "We need to reach the nearest outpost," Ethan said, studying the star charts on the ship's console. "We have to warn the Tribunal, rally the forces of the galaxy. If we don't, there won't be anything left to fight for." But will they believe us? Vela asked, her antennae twitching with concern. The tribunal sentenced us to die. They may not be willing to listen. They'll listen, Ethan said firmly. Because if they don't, they'll be next. The ship, held together by little more than determination and hope, streaked through space at speeds that strained its engines. Every hour brought them closer to the outpost, and every hour the enemy advanced. As they approached their destination, the crew prepared for the worst, knowing that this could be their last stand. When they finally arrived at the outpost, they found it under siege. The enemy fleet, a massive, nightmarish assemblage of ships bristling with weapons, had already begun its assault. The outpost's defenses were crumbling, and it was clear that without reinforcements, it would soon fall. "We're too late," Sarah said, her voice filled with despair. "No," Ethan said, his eyes narrowing with determination. "We're just in time." He turned to Liara. "Open a channel to the outpost. We need to coordinate with their defense forces, get them to hold out as long as possible." Liara nodded and quickly opened the communication channel. Static crackled through the speakers before a weary, but resolute voice answered. "This is Commander Thol of Outpost Theta. Who are you, and what's your business here?" "This is Captain Ethan Walker of the human race," Ethan replied. "We've just come from Tyron IV with critical intelligence. The enemy fleet you're facing is part of a much larger invasion force. We need to warn the Galactic Tribunal and rally every available fleet to this sector." "Walker." Thal sounded incredulous. "The human sentenced to death by the Tribunal. How did you? Never mind, we're in no position to question a miracle. If you have a plan, we're listening." Ethan quickly laid out his strategy. "We need to hold the enemy here as long as possible. Your forces, combined with ours, can buy enough time for reinforcements to arrive. But we'll need to disable their command ship. That's their weak point. Take it out, and the rest of their fleet will fall into disarray." Thal hesitated, then spoke with resolve. "Understood. We'll do our best to hold them off. Just give us a chance." Ethan turned to his crew. "This is it. We take out their command ship, or we die trying. Everyone ready?" The crew nodded, each one steeling themselves for the battle to come. The ship's engines flared as they dove into the heart of the battle, weaving through the chaos of the ongoing assault. Enemy ships swarmed around them, but Ethan's skillful piloting kept them one step ahead. The command ship loomed before them, a monstrous vessel that dwarfed everything else in the fleet. Its weapons fired relentlessly, tearing through the outpost's defenses, but Ethan focused on one thing: the small, vulnerable point at the ship's core, where its power was concentrated. "Core, get ready to fire all we've got," Ethan ordered, his voice steady despite the tension. "We only get one shot at this." "Locked and loaded," Core rumbled, his hands steady on the controls. "Now," Ethan shouted, and Core unleashed a barrage of missiles, plasma, and whatever else the ship had left. The command ship's shields flared, struggling to absorb the impact, but the onslaught was too much. The shields failed, and the missiles struck home. The command ship shuddered, its power core destabilizing. A moment later, it exploded in a brilliant flash of light, sending shockwaves through the enemy fleet. The smaller ships faltered, their formation breaking as confusion spread. "Commander Thol, now's your chance," Ethan called over the comms. "Push them back." With renewed vigor, the outpost's remaining forces surged forward, taking advantage of the enemy's disarray. One by one, the enemy ships were destroyed, their advantage lost with the command ship's destruction. But the battle was far from over. Ethan knew this was just the beginning. A single victory in a war that would span the galaxy. As the dust settled, and the last of the enemy ships were either destroyed or in retreat, Ethan's thoughts turned to what lay ahead. He opened a channel to the Tribunal, broadcasting on all frequencies. "This is Captain Ethan Walker. The threat is real, and it's here. We've just repelled the first wave, but more will come. We need to unite, now more than ever. Prepare your defenses, call in your fleets, and stand ready, because this is a war for the survival of the galaxy. The response was immediate. The Tribunal, humbled by the reality of the situation, ordered an emergency summit. Representatives from every major faction in the galaxy gathered, setting aside their differences in the face of a common enemy. And at the heart of it all was Ethan Walker, the human who had been sentenced to death but had instead become the galaxy's best hope for survival. As the fleets of the galaxy mobilized, preparing for the battles to come, Ethan couldn't help but feel a strange sense of satisfaction. He had survived Action IV, forged alliances with beings from across the stars, and now stood ready to face the greatest threat the galaxy had ever known. The war had only just begun, but with the galaxy united and Ethan leading the charge, there was hope. A hope that even in the face of overwhelming darkness, life would find a way to prevail. The galaxy would remember this moment, and it would remember the name of Captain Ethan Walker, a human who had defied the odds, united the galaxy, and faced down death itself. And as the fleets prepared to jump to their next engagement, Ethan allowed himself one final, grim smile. The enemy was coming, but they had made one critical mistake. They had underestimated humanity. And that would be their undoing.